Hale, who's class of 94, and Julia Reynolds, class of 19, are part of our Hamilton Career Network volunteer team. And they are the lead and the vice lead for the Finance and Consulting Network. Thank you to Clay and to Julia for your efforts to make this program possible. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to them to get started.
Great. Well, thanks, Shauna. And I just want to make a couple comments. And it's great to see over 80 people, or 60 people joining the call tonight. The Hamilton Career Network is something that has been an evolution over the last 18 months, and it's really becoming into full swing right now. I with Julia are leading the finance and consulting. And we had our first event back in New York back in the fall, and it was a great success. We had our second event in person this winter up in Boston. It was a great success, and we were planning to have our third event in San Francisco with a bunch of people talking about the venture capital industry this spring, but then the world changed. And as I was sitting in my house doing Zoom calls and conference calls and returning emails and being, woe is me, like I'm sure everybody else is, one of the things that came up was, upon times of crisis, there's also a lot of times of self-reflection. Do I like what I'm doing? Do I like who I'm working with? Are there other opportunities out there that I should be pursuing? And as I spent time talking with Julia and many other people, we thought that this would be a great forum targeted towards some of the younger alumni who are at that natural transition point in their careers. Is this really what I want to do? Should I be doing something else? And if I want to do something else, what's the right way to get there? Am I supposed to go to graduate school and get an MBA? Am I supposed to study and get the CFA? Am I supposed to go become a lawyer or get a master's in some other discipline? Or do I just want to transition into a totally new job or an adjacent job? And so, as this kind of came about, it really felt like it was hitting home in a perfect time for us to do this as a virtual event. And so, with Julia's leadership, we assembled 4 panelists, who probably know many of the people on the phone, share some of their experiences about, what they thought about, as they were evaluating, do I want to keep in my current job? Do I want to go move to something different? Do I want to go to graduate school? So hopefully you find tonight informative. It's great that we're able to keep on the tradition of the Hamilton Career Network, even though it's virtual versus in person. And with that, let me turn it over to Julia, who's going to be running the program for tonight.
Great, thank you, Clay and Shauna, both for the introductions. So my name is Julia Reynolds. I'm class of 2019. And I do see quite a few familiar faces online, both alumni and current students. So hello and welcome, everyone. I appreciate you all making the time to be here virtually tonight. And an especially big thank you to all of our panelists for volunteering to share their insights and their experience with current students and other young alumni. And as far as the structure for the panel goes, we're going to begin with an introduction from each of the panelists. And afterwards, I do have some prepared questions that we can go through for about 30 minutes. And we will finish things up with about 15-20 minutes of Q&A. And I can go through how that will work logistically after we get through the core portion of the panel. But we can start off with some introductions, and to avoid anyone stepping on anyone else's toes over Zoom, which I'm sure we've all seen quite a bit lately, I'm gonna go youngest Hamilton class year to oldest Hamilton class year. So starting off with Mike, if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely. So hi everyone, my name is Mike Guba. I'm Hamilton class of 2014. I majored in economics and mathematics, in terms of affiliations on campus. I played men's lacrosse. I was involved with Alpha Delta Phi. And then post-college, I took up a job at Citigroup in the markets division, which is a sales and trading division. So I spent my 2 years as an analyst there, bouncing around the equities floor. And after my analyst rotations, I ended up in an equity sales role, from which I've then moved over to a healthcare sector specialist role. And so, my MBA, I haven't started my MBA yet. That's supposed to kick off this fall. I'm going to NYU Stern. So yeah, that's my intro.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. I think we'll turn it over to Ayebea.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ayebea Darko. I'm a class of 2013 and majored in economics at Hamilton. As far as like what I spent most of my time doing, I spent a lot of time at Opus. It's probably my favorite spot on campus. I still dream about that chocolate chip cookie. And left after Hamilton, went into economic consulting at the Brattle Group for 4 years. Before I transitioned into an MBA program, I went to Wharton and graduated last year. Since then, I've been at McKinsey as an associate out of the Boston office.
Thank you, Ayebea. I'll turn it over to Matt.
Oh, can you guys hear me, or have I been muted the whole time?
We can hear you now.
You can hear me now? Okay, I'll restart. So my name is Matt Giamalis. I graduated in 2011 with a major in economics, and I played on the football team. I was a backup. I was like third string on the football team. Fun fact. What else? I was in the DU fraternity, and so I graduated. Came out. So I'm from Connecticut, from Hartford, Connecticut area. And so I came out and worked in the insurance industry, which is the big industry in Hartford. So I worked for Travelers Insurance for 2 years in a rotational finance program. I worked underneath the head of investor relations and the CFO, and I had a couple pretty cool rotations. But when I was doing it, I said to myself, I want to get on the transaction side. And so I was looking for jobs, and I ended up joining with GE Capital, doing leverage lending. A couple of years out to 2013, I started with them. And so I was lending, and leverage lending is essentially, it depends on how big the companies you're lending to, but I was essentially lending in private equity transactions in the mid-market, so like 25 million of EBITDA or so in healthcare. And so I did that for a few years, and our business ended up, GE, as you know, GE sold its finance division, essentially divested 90% of GE Capital. And so they sold us to Capital One, and I'm now there as a director. I made the transition. Now I lend to technology and telecom companies. So I've been there now for 4 years and enjoying it quite a bit. So.
Great, thank you, Matt. And now I will turn it over to Katie, another class of 2011 grad.
Thanks, Julia. Hi, everyone. Katie McGuire, class of 2011. I studied, well, at Hamilton, I got a major in world politics, and, things I like to do around campus. I was involved with club soccer and a couple groups, but primarily going to the parties that Matt was throwing and hanging out at the VT. And post-undergrad, I worked in DC for an international economic development program. It was very soft skills oriented, managing projects and teams, and really, really cool work, a lot internationally. But I felt like I was really lacking a sort of hard skill foundation. And even though I'd had a great opportunity to lead and manage and organize things, I was lacking that skill set. So business school was a really natural way for me to develop that and go and pivot into a space where I would be able to develop that, pretty substantially. So I decided to go into investment banking. I did an internship with Evercore in New York after my first year of B school at Cornell. And I transitioned to our Houston office full time because I'd wanted to do oil and gas. In fact, ever since undergrad, I did my thesis senior year on oil companies operating in Africa. So I had wanted to do oil and gas for a long time. Did the MBA really gives you a great opportunity to pivot once to a new skill set entirely, and secondly to a totally new industry if you want to. So I've been down in Houston for about I guess, 3 years. So yeah, it's been great.
Great, thank you, Katie. And I know some of you did touch on this briefly, especially Katie, in your introductions, but you all chose to pursue MBAs for a variety of different reasons. And we would love to hear from each of you about the unique path and thought process that led you to an MBA. And we can start off in the same order we started with Mike.
Great, for sure. So yeah, really the idea of pursuing MBA started a few years back when I was kind of looking at the outlook for the sales and trading industry within equities. And I kind of came to a realization that due to kind of more secular pressures across the industry through automation or kind of reduced headcount across the board, it would be a good idea to have, the GMAT in the back pocket in case I wanted to pursue an MBA. And then from there, I kind of started to dig around, looking at different programs, and it just kind of made me realize that over the long run, if I'm looking at my career, longer than the next 2 years and looking to the out years, realistically, I couldn't necessarily see myself doing the exact role that I do now, although I really do enjoy it, in my mid 30s or 40s. And as a result, I kind of did some soul searching and trying to figure out what I really wanted to be focused on in terms of what concentration or what I could see myself doing after an MBA. And I realized that I didn't have much of an idea. And so from that, I came to the realization that it was probably a good idea to try and understand a base path of what I could want to do. But an MBA would be an extraordinary opportunity to learn from my peers, frankly, from all different backgrounds and all different industries, and try and use that as an opportunity to really kind of answer that question for myself. So a little bit of the development there was kind of in picking up the new healthcare role. I fell in love with an industry. So at NYU, I'll be specializing in healthcare, as well as entrepreneurship, which I think is going to be an interesting combo for the end goal of focusing on impact investing, primarily in private markets, with a healthcare dedicated tilt. So that's kind of I probably spoke too long there, but that's the overall.
Thank you, Mike. And I will pass it along to Ayebea.
Sure. So I have similar reasons to Katie for pursuing an MBA. So I had been in economic consulting, as I mentioned, for about 4 years before I decided to go into an MBA program. And it was primarily because while I learned a lot in economic consulting, it's a great job to have out of college, and that you learn a lot, really do develop some strong, hard quant skills. I wanted to do something that was a lot more forward-looking and actually helping, companies design strategies and that sort of thing. So that's why I eventually decided to apply to an MBA program. And I was very targeted actually about the programs I was applying to, because I had an idea of wanting to do management consulting after school. And so really thought about what programs I thought would help me achieve that goal, as well as would have the resources, I guess, like when you think about career centers, etc., would have the resources to help me achieve that goal. So that was the main reason I applied to an MBA program, and happy to say it was successful. So that's something I think for those of you who are thinking about using an MBA program as a method to switching careers, I would be my recommendation or my advice would be to just think very tactically about what programs you're applying to and how they line up with your future career goals, if that's the biggest thing you're solving for.
Awesome, thank you, Ayebea, and I'll pass the mic to Matt. Matt, I know you are having some tech issues over there, so if you think we can hear you, we can't just yet.
So I think you guys it's telling me I'm muted, and then it just told me I'm unmuted, but I didn't touch it. So I don't know if, can you hear me now or no?
Yeah, you're good
Yes, we
now.
can hear
Sorry,
you.
it's the discrepancy between your video and your audio, the phone and the picture, but I'm working on it.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I have bad internet, so I don't want to hook up through the app, because then it lags, I've found, for my work meetings. But
You're totally fine.
so
Sorry about that.
no big deal. So I was in a unique situation in my career when I was looking into an MBA. So I knew that I wanted to get one because all the folks in my shop who were up the chain kind of had one. And so I was thinking, this is something that 10 years from now, I think I would want. I really loved what I was doing at the time, right? I was working at GE Capital, and we were doing deal making, and I was doing debt deals, and I loved it. It was fun. And I was, at the time I was moving up, and it was one of those things where I had actually gotten to the point where if I left and went back to get my MBA, I likely would have come back into a very similar industry within finance at the level that I left at. So for me, it wasn't economical to leave and then come back.
Great. Thank you, Matt. And last but not least, oh, Matt, are you still on there?
Sorry, cut me off, but it's cutting me off. I'm gonna exit and come back in. Sorry about that.
No worries at all. I will pass it over to Katie for now.
Sure, I won't go too long because I already gave a little bit of this answer, but I will say a couple things I considered in addition to what I mentioned before. I was thinking about, okay, does it now make sense for me to do a master's in economics or a master's in finance or some other sort of more hard skills oriented track? But I consulted with a number of industry experts and mentors that I've had over the years, and in terms of what I was looking to potentially access, which was a little bit more private sector oriented, the MBA made the most sense. On top of that, I think other programs don't offer the same equivalent of a network in terms of the community that you become a part of, particularly with a full-time program in a isolated place like Ithaca, New York, where literally everyone is only there with other classmates and maybe their families, but no one has friends there existing. And to match with economics, it was a really obvious economic decision for me in terms of what my financial situation was prior to business school and what it could be after. Sort of regardless of whatever I decided to pursue, it was going to be a good decision. So that's something that the MBA, I think, offers that is different than some of those sort of more hard skills master's programs you might also think of.
Great. Thank you, Katie. And that's a helpful distinction between some of those different kinds of postgraduate education experiences you can pursue for finance. So that's awesome. And I think just in all of your answers, one thread I kind of noticed going through them, people went into their MBA programs really well prepared in terms of what they wanted to get out of it and what exactly it was that they wanted to do, had an industry or a role that they were targeting in entering an MBA program. So thank you all for running us through that. And for the next question, this may be a little bit less top of mind for some of our current students who are tuned in, but more top of mind for any young professionals looking at MBA programs right now. In evaluating applicants, I understand admissions committees aren't really just looking at undergraduate grades, GMAT scores, some of those hard statistics, but an array of factors like professional experience, community involvement, and how a candidate might ultimately use their MBA, what their motivation is for pursuing it. So with this in mind, I'm curious what advice you all would give to people looking to make themselves competitive applicants in the process.
I'm assuming we're on the same order, so I'll kick off. So just to your comment saying that from some undergraduates listening that it might not be as topical, I would disagree with that. I think it is. I think you should be thinking about what most interests you now, frankly. And, you know, whether that's community involvement or anything from the extracurricular side, just what you can do to pursue your interests that might make you a more well-rounded candidate. You know, that's something that I learned the hard way, frankly. You know, I definitely have my own hobbies and interests. And I did volunteer work on a one-off basis, but never anything that really showed some consistency, which honestly I feel was a little bit of a detriment in terms of my application. I would rather have just stuck with one organization over those years rather than kind of bouncing around 3 or 4 one-off volunteering situations, just because I think the consistency of that type of involvement really shows the leadership that admissions committees are looking for. So I guess that would be kind of my main point of advice. And the other thing is, I think it's important to be yourself. You know, this is coming from someone who applied a couple times. And at the end of the day, I think admissions committees are able to see through that cookie cutter kind of mold that a lot of people put on because they think it's what the admissions committee wants. But I think being an individual, being yourself, and showing, you know, a real human aspect of yourself goes a long way. And it's, you know, I applied 2 rounds, didn't get in where I wanted to the first time around, which was very cookie cutter-esque application. And then I kind of threw my hands up and was just as honest as I could be. And it ended up working out very well for me for NYU. So that's my answer.
Great, thank you, Mike. And we can pass it off to Ayebea.
So I definitely agree with everything you just said, Mike. I think it's important to really take the time to like do a little bit of introspection and understand really like what you're interested in, why you're applying to the MBA program, and again, as Mike said, like be yourself, like really explain, you know, what you're interested in and what you're hoping to get out of the program and how it sort of fits into your ultimate goals and passions and all of that. I think the other piece of like quite tactical like advice I would give is, so just be very thoughtful about your application being holistic as well. So a lot of times, one of the things I did think a lot about was recommendations. So when you are thinking about who should be writing your recommendations for you, really do, and a lot of schools will actually post the questions that are being asked of the people recommending you. Really do take the time to think about who would be best positioned to answer those questions, as what up and down sort of the chain, let me call it, of wherever you're working, right? So if it's your immediate manager as well as your, you know, someone more senior in the company, but really do think about who knows you, who understands what your goals are, and who could best articulate that for you on your applications, and really think about that as well.
Great, thank you for that. And I do want to check, do we have Matt on the line with audio right now?
I am I'm on now. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, there we go. Perfect.
All right, awesome. So I'm gonna I think my last answer was pretty incoherent because I cut myself off, but I'll finish that and kind of relay it into this kind of topic. So again, I was at this point in my career where it didn't make sense to leave and go back and then come in back at the same level because I liked the track that I was on. And so I talked to my company about, I worked with them to get sponsored and to apply for an executive MBA program. So I applied to Wharton's, they call it the kind of nickname for it is the Wharton Weekend, but it's like an executive MBA program through Wharton. And it was a great experience. There was a lot of juggling, but I would say the biggest piece, and I'd really echo the last answer, the biggest piece that helped get me in was to have you know, supportive coworkers who could vouch to my work and the quality of my work and who I was as a leader and as a person. I think that's the most important part of the application. You know, obviously there's the tangible elements like GMAT, like your GPA, but I think the intangibles are what are going to make or break you and get you in. And so that was huge for me. And so I would say, and the other thing is, it doesn't matter how high up the person is who's recommending you. It matters that they know you and they can speak to what's on your resume and that it weaves into the rest of your story. So that I would just stress those points.
Awesome, thank you. And we'll pass it off to Katie.
Yeah, so when I have talked to admissions people before, I mean, yes, they're looking to generate a great class and a great class experience, but their like key performance indicators not only rely on, you know, what scores people are bringing in the door, but on how many people are getting hired out of the school. And, you know, that all the schools will kind of rank themselves based on the quality and their ability to funnel people into great jobs. And so when an admissions person is evaluating you, they're thinking, will this person get hired? And so you have to really treat it, I think, like a job application in a way. And I found it really helpful to develop personal relationships with people that worked in admissions offices, following up courteously, not, you know, don't suffocate them, but showing genuine interest in the school, understanding the merits of the school, understanding how you would fit in the school. That's going to help you communicate it on the essays and in the interview. But it's also those showing up, like visiting the school, having one-on-one interaction with multiple people that work in admissions so they know you and that you can genuinely have a conversation. You'd be surprised, like, just the ability to have like a real conversation with someone, how valuable it is to demonstrate that as opposed to something that's on a page. So I think that those are some additional things that you should really seek out opportunities for people to get to know you in admissions as part of the process.
Great, thank you all. And continuing on that admissions thread, I know MBA programs are definitely one of the more expensive options that you'd have for graduate education, and was curious what advice people have for scholarships and funding. And I do want to direct this specifically towards Katie, because I know she has some experience with it, as well as Ayebea on the international student side and securing funding there, if you two want to address this one.
Yeah, happy to kick it off. I think, yes, the sticker price on an MBA program is extremely high. In addition to that, the opportunity cost, if you're doing a full-time program, to losing out on income over 2 years, with the exception of your like summer internship, essentially, can be pretty daunting. You should feel comfortable taking out, to the extent you don't already have a lot of money, taking out loans. I was fortunate enough to get a fair amount of scholarship money, but still took out a lot of federal loans. Friends of mine took out private loans. You should meet with a financial advisor and figure out if it genuinely makes sense for you. There are roles out of an MBA program that will pay more than other roles out of an MBA program. And so if you're making this decision as a financial decision, as opposed to something that's, you know, more personal and like something you want to do for your life, it might not make sense to leave that $90,000 a year job for something that's going to make $110 right away. So there's a lot to think about. On top of that, the scholarships and like external funding available, I found it wasn't very friendly towards MBA programs. I mean, part of that is just because the MBA program is so private sector oriented that I think philanthropic organizations figure that people will generally not be as needy as other pursuits. But a lot of schools directly have funding available through alumni or other programs. Cornell, where I attended, had a specific program for 20 to 25 people. It was like a separate leadership development program, and everyone was able to access financial aid through that. So you have to, you know, do research through the schools, figure out where those opportunities are. They're mostly, I think, through the schools, unless you have some special talent that has an organization that's funding things. But it's accessible, and it's another thing you want to track down, show interest in. Don't just submit an application blindly. You need to hustle for stuff like that to be considered.
So on the international student front, so everything that Katie just talked about still applies. So there are scholarships available. There is, some schools do provide, I think like HBS provides need-based help as well. So there are options if you're an international student. I think the biggest thing to think about as an international student, and something I had to heavily weigh before making the decision, was especially if you're going to go the private loan route, that typically you will get higher interest rates, just because you're not, you don't have permanent residency, you don't have sort of a long-term proof of staying in the United States. So that's something you really have to consider. There are companies that do specialize in loans specifically to international students and will have better rates than others. So Prodigy Finance is another, if you're starting to look into this. Another option that I didn't personally take, but I've seen people take, is to do the part-time MBA and work as they're getting their MBA while they're on an H-1B visa. And so that way they're sort of paying as they go along as an option. But all the funding options are available to you. Some scholarships might be limited to, depending on who has awarded the scholarship, right, might be limited to citizens of the United States, but there are usually scholarship options for international students as well. And then the last thing I'll mention is that I do know some people who applied for like external grants. So sometimes there'll be organizations that have grants that you can apply for. So it's sort of like an application process, and you can get a grant that way. I had a friend who went to Wharton with me as well, who got a grant like that for, I think specifically for engineers. But there are grants like that outside of the school specific and private loan sphere that are available if you do want to apply.
Great, thank you both. And one more thing, I don't know if Matt wants to touch on this briefly at all, but some employers do offer programs, particularly for executive MBAs, where they will make some kind of contribution if they have someone who's planning on staying at the firm, advancing there. So if Matt wants to speak to that or add anything at all, feel free.
So I would just say, look, if you're at a large employer, it's much more likely that they're willing to do it. But that said, I know a number of, classmates who worked at kind of small or mid-sized kind of private equity shops, little law firms, hospitals, all types of professions where their employer chipped in either 50 or 100%. A lot of times in order to, so these programs are structured similarly, but also differently. So similarly in that, so my program was technically full-time. We were on the same curriculum and timing as the full-time Wharton students. But the only difference is that in the application process, they put more weight on, they want people who are leaders in their organization. And so they want to know that your organization is like extremely supportive of you. So they want to see that your employer is willing to literally put forth a sum of money behind your name. And so usually they require, you're not really competitive unless you have 50 or 100%, 50 to 100% of the tuition spoken for. The way that it works, typically, the market is your employer will pay, a very material sum. And then after you graduate, you usually vest over a 2-year period. That's kind of, from what I've spoken to my classmates about it, it's usually a 1 to 2 year vest. Some of them, their employers weren't that smart, maybe you want to say, or advanced with how they did it, and they have no vest. And so, hey, they, their employers just paid, and they don't have to stick around, technically. But yeah, a lot of times it's a 2-year vest. It's kind of the market. And look, people even in the executive programs that are being sponsored, I would say half of my class changed jobs during the program, just because, again, the school is an attractive school and there's a big network that you can tap into. And so just because you did it on an executive basis doesn't mean you can't move or think of moving. You're not trapped, but it just gives you an additional piece to think about, because you have, your employer is supporting you. And if you're making this agreement with your employer, you should have a line of sight. You should, like, for me, I thought, you know what, look, there's a 2-year vest and I probably have another 2 to 4 to 5, something like that years with this company where I feel very content. And if I want to leave during that time because something really attractive comes along, good for me. That's kind of how I viewed it. So.
Great, thanks for that, Matt. And I do want to leave plenty of time for Q&A because I'm curious to hear what everyone here has to say, what they're curious about coming out of this panel. So I do have 2 more questions that I want to address before we get to that. And the first is specifically for Mike, because he's the most recent GMAT taker, I believe, on prep strategies, what he's kind of heard from other people who have gone through the same process, what works, what doesn't, and any advice on that front.
Yeah, for sure. I got lucky for sure. I did very well in the GMAT. But what I would say helped the most was definitely just repeated practice tests. A lot of different test prep providers will offer classes and, you know, access to the books and everything across the board there. And I think it really depends on how you learn best. I'm not necessarily someone that learns all too well sitting in a classroom for 6 hours on a Saturday. So I was much more of a kind of do it, like work at your own pace, do it when you can. And the other difficult part was just with my job, I didn't have much time after work because that could move around in terms of timing. So what I found was the best strategy was just trying to gain access to whatever test prep software or test prep provider gave the most like comprehensive or largest list of practice tests and practice questions and everything there. Because there are definitely a couple strategies that you need to learn throughout it. But at least I, as a math major, I guess the quantitative aspect of it never really overwhelmed me. And so I kind of picked up those quick strategies or those quick tricks relatively quickly. And then, you know, it was just a matter of getting timing down, muscle memory, because at the end of the day, a big part of the test is kind of the race against the clock, I'd say. And so it's the ability to see a question that you're not, no shot you're going to answer it, take the best guess you can and move on. So yeah, I think muscle memory is probably the best way to approach that. And you know, if anyone has any questions on what I use, just you can reach out after. Julia will give you my contact information. I'm happy to talk about it.
Awesome, thank you. And the last question, this is for everyone except Mike, who hasn't started his MBA yet. I'm curious what you all think the most valuable thing you got out of your MBA was. And we can start it off with whoever feels ready to answer, because I know this might take some pondering, thinking.
I think you will hear jokes from people that haven't done an MBA talk about the degree as a 2-year vacation. And there are aspects to the degree that, you know, provide some degree of flexibility. A lot of schools don't provide grade. There's non-grade disclosure. So you're like, when employers aren't allowed to ask you what your grades are. And so there's less stress on academics for a lot of things. I'm definitely an academic person. I wanted to go like develop hard skills. And so I was very focused on it. But I think the thing that I got most out of the program on top of that sort of foundational skill set that I really wanted was access to an incredible new friend group. The recruiting process for investment banking is extremely stressful, and it kicks off pretty much on arrival in August of the full-time program. And, you know, from Cornell, it means oh my gosh. Hey, Matt, can you go and, is Matt, I don't know, there's some noise that's like buzzing. Anyway, like every Thursday night, we would all drive down in cars to New York City, practicing technicals. And then Friday, we'd be running around New York City in our suits with our padfolios, like going to different banks and interviewing. And we'd all go to the Cornell Club after and like debrief. And it was, you know, that was a week of, you know, multiple banks coming on campus, coffee chats, like on top of your classes. It's extremely high intensity, but you're going through it with a group of awesome people and bonding through that sort of hazing process. And I still stay in really, really close touch with a lot of those people, even though not many of them have come down to Houston, which has just been like fantastic. Also take all the trips you can. I'm a big advocate for like taking money out and going on as many trips as you can, because most of the jobs that you get out of an MBA program will mean you don't get to do cool travel unless you're doing a more relaxed work pursuit for at least a few years.
Thanks, Katie. And do we have Matt on here?
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, I would, so was the question about interviewing? It cut me off right before Katie's question again, so I'm back now. Was the question about interviewing? What was the question with respect to?
The question was about what the most valuable thing you got out of your MBA was. And it might
It's still doing it to me. Oh my God. Let me, I'm just gonna dial in with the phone. I'll take it off camera.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry about that.
In the
Maybe
meantime, we can have Matt address this when he gets back online, but I'm going to open it up to Q&A. And if you would like to pose the question directly, you can use the raise hand feature on Zoom, and Shauna will pass it over to you so you can pose the question. You can also type it in the chat and I can ask the panelists for you. And if it's a question that's directed towards a specific panelist, if you just specify their name in there, I can make sure it gets directed to the right person.
We have a few questions in the chat window already. So I'll start the first one. I'll type more in there if they'd like. So the first one is from Marlon, and they said, "Hi, I have been trading options for myself for the last few years with a profitable track record. Would like to trade options professionally. My background is in real estate in New York, but I would like to make the career switch. Any advice on how I might do that?"
Shauna, you might have to repeat that because it was very soft.
Sorry about that. Is that better?
Much better.
Yes.
Okay. So from Marlon, "Hi, I have been trading options for myself for the last few years with a profitable track record and would like to trade options professionally. My background is in real estate in New York, but I would like to make the career switch. Any advice on how I might do that?"
So I can try and address that, just given the sales and trading aspect there. Yeah, I think, well, one, congratulations on the track record. That's pretty cool. That's pretty solid for you. I think it's difficult, for sure, just because most banks tend to recruit directly out of their sales and trading analyst programs. That said, I don't think it's impossible. I think from guys that I work with, who are either clients or I interact with frequently at Citi, guys that kind of have made those switches have usually started in, we'll say, to be direct, less desirable execution roles. So whether you're trading overnight, you're trading Europe overnight based in the US, so you're kind of working reverse hours. And then from there, usually those are like smaller buy-side shops. You can kind of leverage relationships that you build there into different roles. But I think that would probably be the best avenue to approach.
Great. Another question is from Elijah, asking if there's any recommendations on GMAT versus GRE.
I personally, well, I'll just say this. If you are interested in going through a very traditional path of investment banking or consulting out of a business school, I would highly encourage you to pursue the GMAT. And if you're looking to go to one of the more elite brand names in those two industries, I would highly encourage you to take the GMAT until you get over a 700. At the same time, in terms of general admissions, I think there's a little bit more flexibility if you're not interested in pursuing either of those two tracks. But Ayebea may be able to correct me on consulting if I'm not right.
Oh, yeah, no, I think in general, yes, there is a preference towards the GMAT. I was just going to add that this might be something, as like Katie was talking about earlier, as you're talking to admissions, just to ask and see what the general school approach is, because I think I mean, in general, yes, there's a preference, but I also think it's hard because I can point to people who have done the GRE and went to school and went into banking. So I think just, I don't know, it's a hard question to answer on my end, but I do agree with Katie that there is a general preference towards the GMAT, but it also isn't like if you don't do the GMAT, you're like doomed sort of thing. So I would just see what you're hearing as you go through admissions, and I think make the decision for yourself there. Yeah.
Great. Let's see. Eric is curious, what courses at Hamilton were the most helpful for your careers?
For me, probably some of the more applied mathematics courses were helpful for me. Kind of just an understanding and comfortability, or getting comfortable with, quantitative issues. And then, anything from the econ stuff is also always very helpful. I'm not sure if the class curriculum has changed. I'm pretty sure it has, just speaking with current students. But, to take the intro to accounting course, I think that's always kind of a staple. So that's definitely necessary. But the value of the liberal arts degree is that you don't necessarily have to take math and finance courses, right? Or math and econ courses. So despite those being the paths that I chose, I think at the end of the day, an MBA post starting another role, it's a chance to, it's not as focused on the courses in terms of the go forward.
Okay, it looks like Eric Fisher has his hand raised. Eric, do you want to jump in and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you all for doing this. Quick question to all of you. What did the time frame look like for deciding you wanted something a little bit different to actually entering the MBA program? And within that time frame, how did that break down into, hey, I'm just, I'm looking for something different versus, okay, I'm committed to an MBA and now I'm full on prep and studying for the GMAT and applying and the like?
Yeah, it was definitely like a multi-year process. First of all, congratulations on graduating. That's great. I'm sorry you're having to do it virtually, but it's still an awesome achievement. I started to think about an MBA as early as my senior year at Hamilton, but the advice I received then was that it would be best to wait a few years, get some work experience under your belt, and then go for the degree. I think that's still very sound advice, to come in with at least a couple years under your belt. Some employers, if I'm speaking from the banking lens, kind of definitely discourage people who have gone directly into MBA programs and then try to go into associate roles without having any work experience. They'll sometimes even pigeonhole people back into an analyst role. But other groups are more flexible. I think you'll just get more out of it if you have a few years under your belt. But yeah, the whole pre-application process was probably 18 months when I first started looking at taking the GMAT, studying, scheduling it once, not being happy with my score, studying some more, taking it again, then deciding to apply. So yeah, it was definitely like an 18-month process before I, really committed to doing it.
All right. Matthew asks, what are your opinions, if any, on joint degrees such as JD MBA?
I think it's something you're interested in. Absolutely, it's awesome. I've got a bunch of close friends. Actually, my best friend from Hamilton College just graduated from BU with a JD MBA, and adored the experience. Has definitely walked away, well prepared to enter a consulting role. But this is an opinion of just someone kind of looking in from the outside, I'd say. So I'd actually be curious to hear from the rest of the panelists on their classmates.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I actually went to school with a number of lawyers who were about to take over their practice. And that's why they were going back to business school, because they wanted the business side of it. And so they were considering, so they already had their JD, so this was their MBA. This was like the next logical kind of step for them in their careers. I think if you're going to do the JD MBA, I think you need to have a real leaning towards the legal side to put that knowledge base to work. What I will tell you is in many MBA programs, you can get courses like legal studies and ethics, or a number. I mean, like for me in finance, I was really interested in distressed debt and bankruptcy. And so Wharton had like a couple of courses that really covered it in pretty good detail and gave me enough of a legal sense where I could make business decisions off of it. And so to me, I don't think you need the JD MBA unless you kind of want to be like a practicing lawyer or really close to the legal side for something obscure, something unique. So that's my view of it.
Yeah, I would also add from a community perspective, the JD MBAs had a really hard time immersing themselves in the JD class and in the MBA class because of how their semesters rotated. My MBA class, it was like 2 years, all classes together, and the JD MBA, you flip-flop some semesters, and so you lose like momentum with groups. And so there's a little bit, I think, maybe that JD MBA cohort is super tight-knit, but it's small. And I don't think they have as easy of a time immersing with the broader classes.
Okay, this question comes from Sharif. He says, I am an international student. I came back to my home country to focus on my own business. However, my career trajectory hasn't been the most traditional cookie cutter work experience. Any advice on applying on that front, especially given how my work experience isn't exactly recognized and how I can leverage my position? He also asks what are your thoughts on how COVID might affect any applications?
So I don't think that, so as far as like your work experience not being recognized, I don't think that it wouldn't be recognized. I think that actually it's a good story for you to tell, write about your business and what your business is about and what you've been doing. I have friends who are international students as well who had gone back home, like very similar story to you, gone back home, started businesses, and then came to business school, one of whom was at Wharton with me. So it's all about, I guess, what we had been talking about earlier, which is like just understand, really think about what you're hoping to get out of the MBA program. If it is to go get an MBA and go back to your business, just like articulate how the MBA would, help you take your business to the next level, for example. So I don't think, to summarize, I don't think it's going to be discounted. I think having your own business is valid work experience, and I would just explain, what your business is, why you're passionate about it, and sort of how the MBA fits into that trajectory.
I would just add, what I learned when I was at Wharton was the school wants your experience during your MBA to be transformative. Like they want to know that you're capable of learning and doing the work and being a good classmate and a good teammate, but they want you to get the most out of it. And a lot of people with that cookie cutter background aren't necessarily going to get that. So you actually could have a unique angle to get yourself in. But what you need to sell is what you will get from the experience and how you want to transform that, transform your career around that. That's how I would angle it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right, a couple more questions still coming into the chat. One from Danny. He asks, besides purely looking at program rankings, what factors have you considered in deciding which specific school was right for you?
I would, for me, when I chose Wharton, I knew that I wanted to stay in finance. And to me, Wharton, it probably has the largest network in finance. It's arguable, but it's in the top 1 or 2 finance networks. So for me, it was the one that I chose.
Yeah, for me, NYU, network's a big part of it, as well as location. Born and bred New Yorker, probably tough to see myself ever leaving here. But also the healthcare dedicated tract is relatively new within MBA programs. Not a ton of programs offer, so that's kind of what drove the NYU focus for me.
Yeah, for me, Cornell, I really liked that it was a small, super tight-knit community where people are sort of like forced to be together, and it's a little newer on the finance scene, but they've been definitely climbing the ranks on the investment banking front over the last decade or so, and now putting like 20% of the class on Wall Street every year. So it's a highly structured, easy sort of path to follow if that's what you want to do.
And then for me, it was sort of 2 things for Wharton. One, knowing that I wanted to get into consulting. It's had a strong consulting prep sort of structure, I'll call it, as well as I was interested in being able to do some international programs. And Wharton had a good selection of both international, like short-term programs, as well as you could do, and I did do, an exchange program with INSEAD in France. So that was one of the big driving factors for me.
Right, and the last question that I see in the chat is, how useful has networking been in beginning your careers? And if it has been useful, can you please give some examples?
I wouldn't be here without networking. I wouldn't. No way would I have my job at all. Like, no shot. Clay Hale, who kicked this off, Hamilton alumni, works at Citi. I reached out to him when I was a sophomore. He had a very big role then, has a much bigger role now at Citi, and still took the time to kind of literally handhold me through some stuff. And not even him, just some like countless names of people who I've been introduced to across the street, and then especially Citi. Networking is everything as far as I'm concerned. Not everything, right? That's not fair. But Hamilton College is a phenomenal school. Obviously grades matter. Obviously how well you do will matter. But at the end of the day, those are kind of the way I see them, is that you got to clear those thresholds, right? You got to clear those bare minimums, and then everything from there is open. So I wouldn't even let the kind of grades hold you back. If you can find someone that's going to fight for you in your corner, I think it goes a very, very long way.
We have another question from Bianca, who asks if you could speak to the transition of going back to school after a few years working in finance, and how the emphasis on teamwork with an MBA eased or hurt that transition.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. So back to school was a little bit of a rude awakening for me, in the sense that I had to be on a cadence to get work done for classes. I had done my CFA previously before going back to my MBA, and that didn't really bother me because I was on my own schedule and I set my own time, and I could do it around deals, right? If the deal was really hot and I was, my time consumption, I had no time, I could focus on my deal. And if I did have time, I could focus on my CFA. With the MBA, you're on a classroom cadence. And so I would tell you, if you're going to juggle it with work, it's definitely demanding. I think if you have the energy, you should do it. But going back and getting into the books, look, I think Hamilton sets you up pretty well. You just got to kind of get those first couple tests under your belt, and then you're kind of back at it. That was my view. And and work with your study groups. You mentioned the team dynamic. I think that's huge. They're going to set you up. Most of these programs set you up with a study group of 5 or 6 people. You're all in the same boat and you're in it together, and you're kind of thrown into the fire with those people, and you got to work with them. And hopefully they're good teammates. Some are, some aren't. I've heard some bad stories. I've heard more good stories, and it kind of helps you smooth the transition, I would say.
Any more questions from anyone? If so, feel free to raise your hands. I mean, not literally like on the list of participants.
So I actually have to run right now. But you guys, I'm in the career network. You can reach out to me. Julia has my email if you need it. I'm in the Hamilton system every possible way. Also, my name is Michael Guba. I'm on LinkedIn. Reach out there. That works too. So I'm sorry. I've got to run. But good luck. And reach out if you have any more questions.
Thanks, Mike. Oh, another question came into the chat. What are specific skills that MBA programs value and how to demonstrate that on applications?
I mean, I think we talked about this a little. No, do you want to talk? We touched on this a little before. I mean, look, I think, whether you have a good GPA or a good GMAT, it's good to have at least one good of those things, hopefully both. But in terms of your background, people are coming from all different types of backgrounds. And so there's no like specific skill set that anyone is looking for. And, Matt mentioned the teams of like 5 or 6 people. They purposefully put you on teams of people that have very different backgrounds to what you have. And it's really amazing to, work on a team of people that come from different places and bring very different things to the table. You just have to bring something to the table, whether if it's based on your personal or previous work experience, and be able to communicate the narrative around what you've done before and why an MBA is going to be the platform that gets you to where you want to be.
Yeah, I agree with Katie. I think that's, your learning team off the bat, it's going to be people from all different, career backgrounds. Like for my group, we had a lawyer, we had myself, we had a guy who worked for the state of Delaware. We had a girl who worked in an art gallery. She was very, very, very smart. She had no finance background whatsoever. She ended up excelling in the program. She got more out of it than anybody, frankly. And that's just, and there's a couple others. We had a group of 6. One guy worked for a glassware company. So it was like all across the board, totally different backgrounds, and they're not looking for any singular aptitude. What they want, and I can't stress this enough, what they want is people who are going to get the most out of it and have an idea of where they want to take it.
The only other thing I'll add to that is like if there are like specific skills they're looking for you to demonstrate, there will be specific questions on the application about it. So I think when I was applying, like Wharton, for example, had a question about teamwork. So I can't reiterate Katie and Matt's points more. Like it's mostly about you really being introspective and thinking about what it is you bring to the table and where the MBA is going to help you get. And if there are very specific skills they're looking for, a lot of times they will ask the question on the application.
Colin asks, what are your impressions of part-time MBA programs?
I think I should start with that one. So mine was technically a full-time program, technically, but it's part-time in the sense that I was still working, which I think is what you're getting at. Look, I think they are definitely illustrative that you're willing to work and grind. And employers, so look, I've had conversations with other employers other than my current one in the last couple of years, and every single time they know, they're like, okay, well, this person's willing to work. because they went back part-time while they were juggling a job and family and everything else. And so for me, I think it's a good indicator. You can't cheat your way around that. You want to go to a school, though. You want to go to a school with a good name and a good network. You need to make sure you can still get that network out of it, because not all of these part-time programs necessarily have a great network. And you also want to make sure you're not cutting corners on the academics. What I liked about the Wharton program was it was literally the same exact expectations as the MBA, and they kind of like held us to it. And they kind of told us out the gate, they're like, this could not go well. If you don't immerse yourself in this, this won't go well for you. And so look, I don't mean to spook anybody from doing it. I think it's awesome because if you look at the monetary swing, like, so my employer paid for it and I didn't have to forego income for 2 years. Like that is like life. Now that I'm done with it, it's like totally different financial situation than what I would otherwise be in. So it's great, but it's going to illustrate that you work hard. You got to go after the right network. And that's kind of my 2 cents. I don't think people discount it though, to be honest with you. I really don't. As long as you're at the right school with the right network.
Just to play devil's advocate, I will say that some employers, including mine, whether or not it's right, based on the fact that people are juggling like basically full-time school and a full-time job, that's totally insane. There may be a reputation that like acceptance into those programs might be less, it might be like, I don't want to say easier to get in, but like, I don't know. I will say that some might discount it a little bit, but a school like Wharton won't be discounted, I don't think. So at the right school.
Like the executive acceptance rate, certainly higher acceptance rate than the full-time, to Katie's point. It was like, I think the full-time was 18% and the executive was 35% or something like that, or 33. I don't even remember, but it was more. It's definitely not as hard to get in. And I will say, to Katie's point, if you're looking to come out and get into like a big investment bank at the associate level or do something along those lines, I would want to go back full time for the purpose of doing something like that. But if you've got a unique if you're coming at it from a unique angle where you're on a career track you want to stay on, it's like a no-brainer. Don't go back full time if that's the case. And if you're young, they look at it a little differently. If you're young, if you're 40 years old and you're doing this, it's viewed differently than if you're 28, I would say. And so it all depends, but it absolutely, it will be, for all else equal, for every single one of these schools, to Katie's point, it will be easier to get in for executive program. No question.
Okay, I want to be sensitive to everyone's time, so we'll take one more question and then we'll let people go on their way. So the last question is someone who wasn't at all interested in finance or consulting until my junior year, I've noticed that a lot of companies prefer to hire people that have long demonstrated interest in these industries. How do you suggest getting over that barrier?
Get an MBA. I mean, seriously, like that. This is what this degree gets you. It's the opportunity to press the reset button. And when people ask you why do you, like, what have you done that demonstrates you're interested in getting into the finance industry? Well, I decided to get an MBA. I pressed pause on my job where I was doing really well and I had, financial opportunity, and I let that go and I decided to buckle down, spend, an ungodly amount of money to go back to school, and so that I could pursue this passion. I didn't know I wanted to do finance until I was like 25. So you'll be fine.
Yeah, I think to that point, it's very tough in like industries that are structured as consulting and finance to switch into it after you sort of already started out of undergrad in a job. So this was like the easiest as well as the probably most fun way to do that, is like take 2 years off, like meet a bunch of like interesting new people, learn about a bunch of things that I probably wouldn't have learned about outside of school, and then switch into a career that I otherwise would have probably had to do like tons and tons of networking and like just like it's just a lot of legwork to just try and get a foot into the industry, having already sort of set myself on a certain path. And the business school is just an amazing way of just hitting reset, to Katie's point.
I think I can actually speak to that a little briefly as well, as kind of a recent grad. And I think you may want to kind of expand the way that you're thinking. If you're junior year, you're kind of first starting to consider opportunities in finance and consulting. That's actually exactly where I found myself, and I'm happy to address this offline, but kind of looking outside of some of those bigger internship programs that are really structured, do recruiting super early, maybe looking at not New York, a smaller city, smaller, more boutique firms. People might be more amenable to having those conversations with someone who's developed a really genuine interest in finance just a little bit later in the game in their college career. So again, my email's in the chat and I'd be happy to address it offline, but those are just some initial quick thoughts.
Great. Well, we want to thank everyone so much for being here tonight, both the attendees and all of our speakers. You guys were wonderful, so we really appreciate your time. This, as I said earlier, this session has been recorded, and so it will be posted online within the next week or so. So feel free to check back if you want to watch again. And Julia posted her contact information in the chat, so feel free to contact her if you want to get in touch with any of the panelists as well. So thank you all for being here, and I hope everyone has a good night.
Thanks.